They said Emily Harper vanished on her way to school. Just a girl on a red bicycle who never rang the bell. But 45 years later, when a storm ripped through Briar Ridge and unearthed a hidden shelter beneath a forgotten barn, the town discovered she hadn't vanished at all. She had been waiting, buried not by nature, but by secrets. Please subscribe before watching. Thank you. Briar Ridge was the kind of place where time moved slow and people stayed put. The trees arched over narrow streets like protective arms, and everyone knew which screen door squeaked and which neighbors overwatered their lawns. It was quiet, ordinary, and that's what made the disappearance of Emily Harper all the more jarring. It was a bright spring morning in April 1980, the kind of morning that smelled like fresh-cut grass and sounded like distant lawn mowers and robins in the trees. Emily Harper, 12 years old, with a red ribbon in her hair and a lopsided smile, pedaled away from her house on her red bicycle. Her backpack bumped against the wire basket. Her last known words were, "Tell Mrs. Pickens I finished that book," to the mailman across the street. She never made it to school. She never rang the bell. The school called at 9:22 a.m. By 10:15, her mother was pacing the porch, clutching her apron with white-knuckled fists. At 11:30, her father left work at the grain mill to join the search. By 3 p.m., the sheriff had issued a missing child alert. The community banded together, forming search lines across the creek, the woods, the old trails behind Miller Farm. But the girl was gone. 3 days later, a boy named Jimmy Kirkland found Emily's school bag in the shallow creek south of town. It was waterlogged but intact. Her math notebook still had a doodle of a cat on the front page. There was no sign of her bicycle, shoes, or Emily herself. Rumors swirled like dust devils on a dry road. She was snatched by a stranger. No, it was that drifter they saw in town last week. Someone in town did it. Someone we know. Emily's disappearance gripped the town in fear and confusion. The Harper family shut down emotionally. Her father stopped going to work. Her mother stopped cooking. Her older brother Daniel, 15 at the time, barely spoke for a year. And Briar Ridge, polite and quiet, just moved on. The way small towns sometimes do when pain becomes too heavy to carry. By the time the fall leaves turned, Emily Harper had become a story mothers told to their children. Don't wander off the road. Always tell someone where you're going. Remember Emily Harper. A small memorial plaque was installed on the school wall beside the flagpole. It read, "In memory of Emily Harper, disappeared April 12, 1980, gone but not forgotten." But time, as always, wore memory thin. By the late 90s, the plaque had faded. The wood rotted. People stopped mentioning her name, except in whispers. And somewhere, under the soil of Briar Ridge, the truth waited. 12 hours before Emily vanished, something happened that no one remembered, or perhaps chose not to. Late that Thursday night, a loud truck rumbled down Miller Road, a road rarely used anymore. Witnesses said they heard heavy equipment, metal scraping, chains rattling. It was dismissed as a farm delivery or someone fixing old irrigation. Nobody thought to connect it to Emily. That same night, neighbors nearby reported a strange chemical smell drifting in from the old Miller property. One woman got a nosebleed. Another's chickens died the next morning. No one took notes. No one asked questions. The sheriff back then, Earl McCready, made a strong public showing. There were flyers, TV statements, volunteer search drives. But behind closed doors, Earl admitted to his deputies, "There's no trail to follow." It's like she just evaporated. There was one lead, a muddy partial footprint found near the creek, too big to be Emily's. It was never matched to anyone. The only physical trace of her, aside from the school bag, vanished like smoke. And then there was Old Man Wilkins, the caretaker of the Miller property, who claimed he saw Emily's bike near the barn the day she vanished. She was out by the edge of the field, he told investigators, trembling, talking to someone. I waved, but she didn't wave back. Next time I looked, she was gone. When asked who she was talking to, he replied, "Didn't see. Only the shadow." They said Wilkins was senile, that his whiskey habit made him unreliable. No one pursued it further. That was 45 years ago. And in all that time, no one knew the girl was still on the property, buried deep. Not in body, but in story. The wind shifts directions on a spring night in Arkansas. Sometimes it brings rain, sometimes answers, and sometimes the wind unearths what the town long tried to forget. Clara Harper hadn't planned to come back to Briar Ridge. Not for a visit, not even for a funeral, and definitely not to stay. But when her father's stroke struck just before Easter and the assisted living facility called from 3 states away, the decision was made for her. Now, driving past the weather-worn "Welcome to Briar Ridge" sign, her stomach turned. It was smaller than she remembered. Chipped white paint, vines growing up the base like ivy trying to erase the past. It had been 12 years since she'd last been here. And still, it felt like the ghost of the town wrapped itself around her throat the minute she crossed the line. She parked outside the old Harper house on Sycamore Lane, a modest brick home with too many windows and not enough life behind them. The lawn was overgrown, the shutters crooked. The porch swing was still there, but the ropes had frayed and sagged with age. Inside, her father lay asleep in a rented hospital bed in the living room, monitors gently beeping beside him. He looked smaller than she remembered, shrunk by time and illness, his once powerful voice now a whisper of breath. "Clara," came a voice from the kitchen. It was Marcy Benson, a longtime neighbor who now doubled as caretaker. She offered a tired smile and a warm hug. "Your daddy's resting. He has good hours and bad ones, mostly bad, I won't lie." Clara nodded. "Thanks for keeping things running." Marcy patted her shoulder. "Wasn't just for him. Your mama was like a sister to me. I'd do it all over again." Later that night, Clara sat in the dim living room, flipping through a binder of old mail. Most of it was bills. A few "get-well-soon" cards. But wedged between the envelopes was a folded piece of local newspaper, yellowed at the edges. It was a clipping, a reprint of the 1980 article about Emily Harper's disappearance, her aunt, the family's phantom. She unfolded it with trembling fingers. April 14th, 1980, the Briar Ridge Sentinel. Young girl missing. Police continue. Search for 12-year-old Emily Harper. Emily Harper, a 7th grade student at Briar Ridge Middle School, vanished Friday morning en route to school. She was last seen riding her red bicycle on Miller Road. Clara had read this story a dozen times as a teenager, piecing together her family's painful silence. Daniel, her father, never spoke of his sister. Not once. The only things Clara knew came from snippets in the newspaper and whispers between relatives when they thought she wasn't listening. She had grown up in the shadow of a missing girl, always feeling like a second echo in a house that had already lost its first sound. The next morning, Clara stepped out for air, walking the familiar streets. The town hadn't changed much. Same church, same diner, same gas station with the ancient Coke machine outside. And yet, something felt off. Not aged, unmoved, like a painting behind glass. She passed the school where her aunt had once studied, now repainted and renamed. The bell still hung over the entrance. She paused beneath it, staring at the old plaque. In memory of Emily Harper gone but not forgotten. But the wood had faded, and someone had scratched a line across the bottom. Forgotten after all. Back home, her father stirred. His speech was slurred, one side of his face still limp, but his eyes locked onto Clara's as if trying to tell her something. "Emily," he rasped. Clara leaned in. "What about her?" His eyes fluttered. "She saw something." "What did she see?" She knew. The shelter." His voice cracked and slipped into incoherence. Clara froze. "The shelter?" she repeated. But he had already fallen back into sleep. That evening, Clara visited the local library to dig deeper. She knew the librarian, Mrs. Whitlock, now elderly but sharp as ever. "I remember your aunt," the woman said, her voice softening. "Sweet girl, smart, loved books, broke all our hearts. Do you still have the newspaper archives?" "Of course, back room, microfilm and all." Clara spent 3 hours reading every clipping about her aunt's case, tracing the community's panic, the sudden silence, and the abrupt end to all investigation. It all dried up around mid-May 1980, about a month after Emily disappeared. The final article read like a sigh of defeat. "No new leads, no suspects. Case remains open." Clara shook her head. Something wasn't right. People didn't just vanish. Not in broad daylight. Not on a bike route 5 blocks from home. She stepped outside into the night air, her mind buzzing. That's when the sky flashed white, and the ground shook. It was a thunderstorm, fierce and sudden, but the rumble wasn't thunder. It was an impact, and at the edge of town, a giant oak tree behind the old Miller farm gave way and collapsed. The next morning, Clara read the headline on her phone while sipping weak coffee from the diner. "Storm exposes hidden structure under old Miller farm." Demolition crew discovers sealed underground chamber after tree fall. Her heart skipped. Shelter. She didn't wait for breakfast. At the site, police tape flapped in the wind. A small crowd had gathered, mostly retirees and locals with too much time and too many opinions. Clara saw the crew working to clear debris around what appeared to be a concrete slab with a steel hatch, rusted shut. A man in a reflective vest stepped away from the tape and removed his hard hat. "You Clara Harper?" She blinked. "Yeah, how'd you know?" "Sheriff said someone might come looking. They found a few things inside." He nodded toward a folding table under a tent. Clara stepped forward and stopped cold. On the table, wrapped in plastic, lay a red bicycle, rusted almost to dust. A partially intact school uniform, a metal box, sealed shut. Her breath caught. The box was marked HH in faint, old initials. Emily's full name, Harper Emily Hope. The man added gently, "We think it might be her." The lab's still testing the remains. Clara looked at the box. Her father's words echoed. She saw something. The shelter. The past wasn't buried. Not completely. And neither was the truth. Next chapter. The shelter unearthed. The box is opened. The diary inside speaks for the first time in 45 years. The metal box was heavier than it looked. At the sheriff's office, Clara sat across from Sheriff Leah Collins, a no-nonsense woman in her 50s with iron-gray hair pulled into a tight ponytail and eyes that didn't miss much. The steel box sat between them on a cleared desk, resting on a clean sheet of butcher paper. "We wanted you to be here when we opened it," Sheriff Collins said. "Why me?" Clara asked, voice low. "You're next of kin to the missing person we believe it belongs to. Emily Harper. That was your aunt, right?" Clara nodded, barely. The sheriff slid on latex gloves. With careful pressure, she pried open the rusted latch. It groaned like it hadn't been touched in decades. Inside, cushioned by yellowing cloth and disintegrated plastic wrap, were a few precious items. A small diary with a cracked vinyl cover. A locket, tarnished but still shaped like a heart. A pencil, worn down to the nub. A photograph of Emily standing in front of the Harper house, smiling broadly with her bicycle beside her. Clara reached for the photograph first. It had weathered time surprisingly well. She recognized the house, though it looked newer, brighter, before the grief had hollowed it out. Emily had the same soft eyes Clara had seen in the mirror, but it was the diary that held her. "Can I read it?" Clara asked. "Not yet," the sheriff said. "We're having it digitized and treated. Paper that old, that damp. It'll disintegrate if we're not careful." But you think it's hers? Collins nodded. The initials inside the cover are EH, and we found the bike she was last seen riding. That storm might have destroyed the barn, but it also exposed this shelter completely intact. We'll have DNA confirmation from the remains in a few days. But it's her. Clara sat back in her chair. She suddenly felt lightheaded. She wasn't kidnapped and taken out of town, she said aloud, mostly to herself. She was here the whole time. Collins leaned forward. And nobody knew. Or, worse, someone did and stayed quiet. Later that day, Clara stood at the shelter site, staring into the dark hole beneath the broken barn. The slab had been removed, revealing a short stairwell leading into a crude underground room lined with wood paneling. A single, dangling light bulb hung from the ceiling. It had been converted from an old Cold War storm shelter, maybe once stocked with supplies, now barren and dead quiet. "You want to see it?" asked Deputy Ethan Rhodes, a younger officer who had helped with the dig. "Has it been cleared?" "Yes, no hazards. But bring a flashlight. It's pitch black without that one bulb, and the generator's finicky." Clara followed him down carefully. The air smelled musty, of wet wood and trapped time. Her light passed over the walls, scratch marks, maybe fingernails, and what looked like writing etched into the lower corner, a child's hand carving. "April 18th, still no one, cold, trying to be brave." It hit Clara like a punch to the chest. She was alive in here, she whispered. Ethan nodded grimly. Judging by the markings and initial medical review, she survived at least a week, maybe 2, starved, dehydrated. No signs of trauma, no struggle. She didn't die violently. She waited. Clara had to sit on the step. What kind of monster hides a little girl here and never comes back? Ethan didn't answer. Maybe because the answer was too big, or maybe because it was someone they still passed in town, someone who paid taxes, went to church, smiled at kids in the park. Back home, Clara told Marcy about the discovery. The older woman gasped and covered her mouth. "All these years," she said. "We thought she'd been taken. But she was right there, at the Miller place." Clara nodded. "Sheriff's office thinks someone used the old storm shelter to hide her. Maybe they panicked. Maybe they meant to move her. But she was alive for days." Marcy crossed herself. "Lord have mercy." That night Clara couldn't sleep. Her mind spiraled. Her father's words, the diary, the shelter, and that photograph. Emily smiling without knowing the cruel fate that would await her before the day's end. Clara pulled the photo out again. Behind Emily, in the shadow of the house, stood something. A man, partially blurred, barely visible. She scanned it with her phone and zoomed in. A figure in work overalls, a wide-brimmed hat, and a strange, dark stain on the back of his left hand, like a birthmark. Clara's heart thudded. That wasn't her father, or her grandfather, or any family member she remembered. She texted the image to herself and wrote underneath, "Who is this?" 2 days later, the sheriff called. DNA results were in. The remains in the shelter belonged to Emily Harper. It was officially no longer a missing persons case. It was a homicide investigation. The lab returned the first pages of the diary 4 days after the storm shelter was uncovered. Clara was already at the sheriff's office when the call came in. Sheriff Collins met her in the evidence room with a solemn expression and a sealed folder labeled "Recovered Diary, Emily Harper, 1980. "We've managed to preserve 8 readable pages," Collins said. "The rest, we're still working on. Mold, water, and time haven't been kind." Clara took the folder with hands that trembled slightly. She opened it and saw 8 digital scans printed on clean paper. Some faded, some nearly pristine. The handwriting was careful, a bit childish, but unmistakably real. It began simply, "April 12th, 1980, Saturday. I didn't go to school. I had to turn around halfway. I saw something bad behind the Miller barn. Men loading barrels into a hole. It smelled awful, like rotten eggs and chemicals. They didn't see me. I don't think. I wanted to tell Daddy, but then one of the men saw me on the road and followed me. I hid in the trees. I dropped my pencil case. I'm scared. I'm writing this in the old shelter. I remembered it from last summer when we played hide and seek. I thought I'd wait until it's safe. It's cold down here. There's no food, but maybe someone will find me soon. Clara stopped reading and looked up at the sheriff. She hid herself. Collins nodded slowly. That's what it looks like. She saw something she wasn't meant to. Possibly illegal dumping. This might be bigger than we thought. Clara turned to the next page. April 13th. I think the man who followed me was Mr. Riggs. He teaches gym. I'm not sure. His truck has the same dent in the door. He came back later and stood near the barn. I heard them talking. They said, "If she talks, it's over." They didn't find me. But I don't think they left either. I miss Mom. I want to go home. I'm hungry. Mr. Riggs? Clara whispered. He taught at her school. Isn't he still alive? Yeah, Collins confirmed. Retired now. Lives in a mobile home near the river. He would have been, what, mid-20s back then? About that. If he was involved, it wasn't just him. This had to be coordinated. The barrels... This sounds like chemical dumping, industrial waste, maybe military or agricultural. Could explain the livestock deaths back then. Clara scanned ahead. April 15th. I think someone knows I'm down here. I heard footsteps on the hatch, but no one opened it. I scratched on the door. I yelled. They just stood there. Then left. Why wouldn't they open it? Are they scared? Or did they do something wrong and want me to disappear? It felt like reading a ghost's voice. Clara clutched the pages, the words digging into her. She wasn't just hiding. Someone found her. Someone knew. And they left her there. Collins sat down across from her. We're building a list. People who worked at the school, the farm, the local government in 1980. Anyone tied to land use, waste permits, or construction. I've also contacted the state EPA and environmental archives. If barrels were involved, someone higher up may have knowledge of it. That afternoon, Clara visited the county archives herself. There, tucked away in a basement room filled with dust and forgotten records, she requested building permits and land records tied to the Miller property from 1979 to 1981. What she found was strange. A permit was filed in January 1980 by the town council to allow temporary soil storage on the Miller land. The signatory, Principal Kenneth Voss of Briar Ridge Middle School. Another name listed as co-sponsor, Councilman Donald Harper. Her grandfather. Clara stared at the document for several long minutes. Her grandfather, long dead, had helped approve something on Miller Farm. A school principal had backed it, and weeks later, a 12-year-old girl who stumbled across a secret was gone. She took a photo of the document with her phone. Then she sat alone in the back of the archives, her hands cold, her jaw clenched. When Clara returned to the Harper home that evening, her father was awake. His eyes followed her across the room, and for a moment, they were lucid. I read the first pages, Clara said quietly. Emily saw something. She knew, and someone left her there. Daniel swallowed with effort. Your grandfather, he rasped. I know. He signed the land permit. So did the school principal. Daniel's hand gripped the blanket. His eyes watered. He made them stop asking questions. Did you know? A pause. I was just a kid, but I heard arguments, late, after she disappeared. I heard Dad yelling at someone about barrels, about Emily talking too much. Why didn't you say anything? He closed his eyes. Because I was scared. And by the time I wasn't, it was too late. That night, Clara returned to her room and opened the final page from the diary. April 18th. I don't think I'll be found. If someone ever reads this, please tell them I didn't run away. I didn't lie. I only wanted to do the right thing. Tell Daniel I remember the game we played in the creek, and Mom's song at night, and the ribbon in my hair. I just wanted to go to school. I wanted to ring the bell. Clara pressed her hand against the page. You will, she whispered. You will. The next morning, Clara walked the perimeter of Miller Farm. The barn was now a skeleton of beams and broken shingles. Yellow police tape fluttered like broken wings in the morning wind. She could still smell the earth's upturned scent, still see the concrete outline of the shelter where her aunt had spent her final days. She kept turning the last words of Emily's diary over in her mind. I just wanted to go to school. I wanted to ring the bell. Clara had always pictured her aunt as frozen in time, a girl in a school uniform, a red bicycle. But now she saw her as something more, brave, observant, and terrifyingly alone. Clara needed answers. She wasn't going to wait for someone else to uncover them. Back at the library, she asked for records on Kenneth Voss, the school principal who co-signed the 1980 land permit. Retired in '84, Mrs. Whitlock said. Had a stroke, died in '97. Didn't have much family, far as I know. Oh, except maybe that cousin of his who ran the hardware store. Last name, Mercer? Clara made a note and left. Her next stop was the town archives, where she requested environmental complaints filed around the time of Emily's disappearance. It took a while. Records from the '80s were rarely digitized. But eventually she found a handwritten letter, dated April 15th, 1980. To whom it may concern, I write to report an illegal smell coming from Miller property at night. Strong chemical odor, dangerous. My animals have taken ill. Please investigate. Darlene Pritchard, 72 Ridgeview Drive. Clara read it 3 times. It had been stamped, received, no follow-up required. And then nothing. No visits, no reports, no soil tests. Just silence. She stopped by 72 Ridgeview Drive, unsure what she'd find. A woman in her 60s answered the door, hair in curlers, eyes guarded. Yes. Hi, I'm Clara Harper, Emily Harper's niece. The woman blinked, then slowly opened the screen door wider. I remember your aunt. I found a complaint letter you filed in 1980 about something happening on Miller Farm. You found that? Darlene said, eyes narrowing. Lord, they told me that was nothing, that I was imagining things. They who? The council, the sheriff. Your grandfather came by personally and said it was a misunderstanding. Gave me a bag of feed and told me the town would make it up to me. She crossed her arms. Next week my chickens were dead. 2 goats got sick, and then your aunt went missing. You think it was connected? Darlene looked her dead in the eye. I know it was. But after Emily vanished, everyone just shut up. Like fear settled in over the whole town. She lowered her voice. Clara, you be careful. They're not all dead yet. That evening, Clara received a brown envelope on her doorstep. No return address. Inside, a photocopy of a town council roster from 1980, with 3 names circled in red pen. Kenneth Voss, Principal Donald Harper, Councilman James Riggs, PE teacher. At the bottom was a note scrawled in shaky handwriting. Ask who cleaned up the creek in '81. Start there. Her pulse quickened. She went to the diner the next morning and found Bill Mercer, Voss's cousin and retired hardware owner, sitting in his usual corner booth. She approached carefully. You're Bill Mercer, right? He looked up over his glasses. Depends on who's asking. Clara Harper, Emily's niece. His fork paused halfway to his mouth. He didn't speak for a long moment. Then, he set the fork down. Didn't think I'd ever hear that name again. I think your cousin knew something about what happened to her. I found his name on permit files, on council rosters. I found Emily's diary. He stared at her, then slowly shook his head. You're stirring ghosts, girl. I'm trying to tell the truth. That's the problem with the truth, he said, sipping his coffee. It doesn't care who it buries. As she left the diner, A dark green pickup truck pulled up beside her at the crosswalk. The passenger window slid down. "You need to stop asking questions," the driver said. He wore sunglasses and a camouflage cap. His voice was flat. "Excuse me? You heard me. Some things in this town were buried for a reason." The truck peeled away before she could get a license plate. Clara stood frozen, heart hammering. They were watching. Later that night, she sat with her father again. "Dad," she whispered, "why would Grandpa be part of this?" Daniel opened his eyes weakly. He didn't want to be. He was pressured. They said the chemical dumping was just fertilizer runoff. But then kids started getting sick, and he said if Emily talked, it would all fall apart, that it was already too late. Clara leaned closer. "Did he know she was in the shelter?" Daniel hesitated. "Yes," he said, "but not until after. They told him too late. He never forgave himself." Clara pulled out her notes, her photos, and the town council copy. She connected the dots, names, dates, permits, and there, in the corner of one document, almost faded away. Creek Cleanup Supervisor, George Langston. That name hadn't come up yet. She opened the town directory and found it. Langston, George W. Former deacon, Mount Olive Baptist Church. Still alive, still in town. She circled the name hard. Mount Olive Baptist Church had once been the pride of Briar Ridge. Whitewashed walls, a peaked steeple, and stained glass windows that glowed like fire at sunset. Now it looked tired. The paint was peeling, the doors creaked, and the welcome sign leaned to one side like it had grown weary of greeting people. Clara stood at the edge of the gravel lot, staring at the building. She hadn't set foot here since she was a child, dragged reluctantly to a Sunday service during a summer visit. Back then, the place had seemed enormous. Today, it felt smaller, more like a monument than a sanctuary. She was here for one reason: George Langston. The name on the creek cleanup records. A former deacon, still listed as living in town. She stepped inside. The air inside the church was thick with dust and age. The pews were lined in perfect rows, each one varnished to a dull sheen. The organ sat silent. Keys yellowed from time and sun. The altar still bore the same cross, but the red cloth draped over it had faded to a dry pink. A young man was vacuuming near the back when Clara entered. He paused, startled, then turned off the machine. "Can I help you?" he asked. "I'm looking for Deacon George Langston. I was told he's part of the church." The man hesitated. "Brother George doesn't come around much anymore. Health issues." "Do you know where he lives?" "Out near the cemetery road. Trailer home next to the pines. You'll see the blue mailbox." Clara thanked him and turned to leave. But something pulled at her. An urge, like a whisper. She paused and looked toward the church office, the one her grandfather used to mention. "Is that the pastor's study?" she asked. The man nodded. "Used to be. Now we use it for storage." "Mind if I look around?" He gave a hesitant shrug. "I guess it's okay. Just don't take anything. Pastor won't be back till later." Inside the study, time had stopped. Books lined the shelves. Old theology volumes, sermon collections, and dusty hymnals. A cracked photo frame sat on the desk. 3 men in suits, standing on the church steps. One of them was Clara's grandfather. The second was Kenneth Voss. The third, she guessed, was George Langston. On the far wall was a locked cabinet. She tried the handle. Stuck. Then her eyes caught a loose floorboard near the baseboard heater, slightly raised. She knelt and tugged. The board popped free. Inside the gap was a sealed envelope, dry and crisp despite the years. She opened it with trembling fingers. Inside, a single, handwritten page in a careful, familiar hand. It was her Aunt Emily's. "If anyone finds this, I wrote it on April 16th. I left it in the church in case the shelter isn't safe anymore. I heard Mr. Langston arguing with someone outside. They said the girl is a problem that needs solving. I know it was him because he talks loud. He said, "We already buried enough truth. One more won't matter." Clara sat back on her heels, her breath caught in her throat. Langston wasn't just part of the cover-up. He might have been planning to kill her. She drove straight to the cemetery road. Pine trees closed in as the houses thinned. The trailer sat hunched behind weeds and overgrown shrubs, blue mailbox leaning sideways like a drunk. Clara parked, got out, and knocked on the dented metal door. No answer. She knocked again. Still nothing. Just as she turned to leave, the door creaked open. A thin, hunched man stood in the doorway, wrapped in a flannel robe. His face was gaunt, liver spots dotting his scalp, but his eyes, those eyes were sharp. "I know who you are," he said. "Then you know why I'm here." Langston stepped aside. "Come in then. If you've come for ghosts, you'll find them." Inside was dim and cramped, smelling faintly of rubbing alcohol and old books. Clara sat in a sagging recliner across from Langston, who moved slowly but deliberately. "I know what you did," she said. "I have a letter. Emily heard you, at the church." He didn't flinch, just stared. "You helped bury waste in the creek. You helped cover up what she saw." Still no answer. Clara's voice sharpened. "You were going to kill her." At that, Langston blinked, just once. "I never touched that girl," he said quietly. "But I didn't stop the ones who did." "Who?" He looked at the wall. "Your grandfather, Principal Voss, Riggs, and the pastor, Harold Whitmore. We all knew what the barrels were. Industrial waste, sludge from a military contractor who didn't want to pay for disposal. Emily saw you." Langston nodded slowly. "She was a good girl. Brave. Too brave. We thought if she stayed quiet, we could clean it up. But she wrote things down. She had a sharp mind, like yours. She wrote that you stood on the hatch, that you didn't open it." Langston looked down. "I thought they'd told her to stay there for her safety, that it was temporary. I didn't know she was starving until it was too late. I heard her voice through the concrete and I walked away." The room was silent. "You let her die." Langston closed his eyes. "Yes." Clara stood. "I'm going to the sheriff. I'll give them the letter. You're part of this. And I won't stop until every one of you is exposed." "I know," Langston said. "That's why I saved this." He reached into a nearby drawer and pulled out a photograph. Emily again, but this time standing beside someone unmistakable. Pastor Harold Whitmore. "You should ask him," Langston said. "Ask him why she trusted him enough to go to that farm in the first place." Mount Olive Baptist Church stood quiet in the early morning haze as Clara parked at the edge of the lot. She could see the sanctuary door propped open and a soft light glowing inside. Someone was there. She took the photograph from her pocket. Emily, smiling beside Pastor Harold Whitmore, a kind-looking man in his 40s at the time, dressed in a neat clerical shirt and tie. He'd been a young pastor then, full of promise, the kind people trusted. But Emily had trusted him too, and someone had betrayed her. The sanctuary was empty, save for the faint creak of floorboards and the smell of lemon polish. Clara walked quietly down the aisle, the photo held tight in her hand. A voice called from behind the pulpit. "You've got Harper eyes." Clara turned. Pastor Harold stood there, older now, at least in his late 70s. His hair was thin, his frame wiry, but his presence still carried that same pastoral calm. A calm Clara now found unnerving. "You knew Emily," Clara said, approaching. "I baptized her," he said. "She used to sit in that second pew with her ribbon always too tight. She loved to sing, even when she was off-key. You were more than her pastor." "I was her friend," he said, eyes clouding. "Then why was she at Miller Farm the day she disappeared?" Clara asked, holding up the photograph. He looked at it but said nothing. "Langston told me. You were there. She trusted you. She thought she was safe. The pastor slowly sat on the edge of the pulpit step, lowering himself with care. I told her to meet me there, he said at last. She came to me the day before, trembling. Said she'd seen something bad, barrels, men in the field, people whispering. Said her father wouldn't listen. She was scared. And you didn't go to the police? I was going to. I wanted to see for myself. I didn't believe it at first. Clara stepped forward. You took her there to prove she was wrong? Harold nodded slowly. I thought if I showed her it was nothing, she could go back to her life. She was just a child. But it wasn't nothing. No, he said, voice cracking. It wasn't. Harold rubbed his hands together as if trying to scrub something invisible from them. We saw them, he continued. Langston, Riggs, your grandfather. They were unloading barrels near the creek. When they saw me, they panicked. Emily hid in the trees. I told her to stay put, but I shouldn't have. What did they say? They told me it was harmless runoff, that it was part of a deal to save the town budget. Said if I opened my mouth, I'd ruin everything, jobs, the church, the school. Did you believe them? No, he said softly. But I didn't know what to do. I went home. I thought I could go to the authorities quietly. Then Emily went missing the next day. And I knew. You knew they did something. I suspected. I confronted your grandfather. He said she'd run away, that she'd panicked and disappeared. But I saw the guilt in his eyes. Clara felt her fists clench. You let that story stand. You let her become a ghost. Harold nodded, tears now lining the corners of his eyes. I didn't have proof. And over time, the silence grew louder than the truth. I buried it. We all did. Clara turned and stared at the empty pulpit. Did you know she was alive in that shelter? No, Harold said. Not until years later. Langston let it slip once. Too much to drink at a deacon's gathering. He said she cried for help and nobody came. That's when I knew. Why didn't you come forward? I tried, Harold whispered. I started writing everything down, preparing to resign, to confess. What stopped you? He looked up, hollow-eyed. The church board. My own deacons. They threatened to bury me the same way we buried the truth. Clara stood for a long moment, then pulled something from her bag. Emily's last diary page. The scan of her final entry. She placed it on the pulpit. You don't get to bury her again, she said. Not this time. Harold looked at the page. He read it slowly, lips trembling. I remember that ribbon, he whispered. The one with the little white dots. Clara turned to leave. You're going to tell the sheriff everything, she said. And if you don't, I will. Outside, the air felt different. Charged, heavier. Clara didn't head straight for her car. Instead, she wandered toward the church cemetery, tucked behind a grove of dogwoods. She paused when she saw the groundskeeper's shed door slightly ajar. Curious, she stepped inside. The room was dark, the air thick with soil and oil. But one thing caught her attention immediately. A set of boots by the door, caked with fresh mud. And beside them, something partially hidden beneath a tarp, a wooden box. She lifted the corner. Inside were old documents, church logs, donation receipts, and buried among them, a familiar cover. Emily's missing 1977 Sunday school journal, the one her father had said was never found. Clara clutched it to her chest. As she stepped back into the sunlight, something became clear. Emily had tried to tell the truth. The adults around her had buried it. But now, the ground was giving it back. The next Sunday morning, Mount Olive Baptist Church was full for the first time in years. Word had spread fast. Whispers in grocery aisles, rumors passed in church circles and diner booths. Emily Harper's niece has something to say. It was more than curiosity that drew the crowd. It was guilt. Or maybe dread. The town had long stopped asking what happened to Emily, but Clara was making sure they wouldn't be able to forget anymore. She stood at the front of the sanctuary, not at the pulpit, but just below it, where her aunt once sang in the children's choir. Sheriff Collins stood silently in the back, arms crossed, eyes on the crowd. Pastor Harold sat in the front pew, pale, expression unreadable. Clara stepped forward with a folder in her hand and a microphone set up on a stand. Her voice was steady, not loud, but clear. It didn't need to be loud. The silence did the rest. My name is Clara Harper. Many of you knew my father, Daniel. Fewer of you knew my Aunt Emily Harper. At least, not the truth about what happened to her. In 1980, Emily disappeared on her way to school. You've all heard the stories. You know what the old papers said. Missing, no leads, no body. But now we know more. Because 2 weeks ago, after the storm, a shelter was found under the Miller property. Inside was Emily's bicycle, her clothes, her remains, and her diary. A ripple went through the crowd. Clara opened the folder and placed a printed scan of Emily's final diary entry on the podium. She was alive for at least 5 days, hidden underground, hungry, afraid. She begged to be found. And she wasn't. Clara paused. She had discovered something. A group of men, including school officials, town leaders, and church members, were illegally dumping toxic waste near the creek. She saw them and tried to tell the truth. Instead of protecting her, the people she trusted covered it up. My grandfather, Principal Voss, and Deacon Langston all signed permits. Pastor Whitmore took her to the site, believing she was mistaken, but when it became clear she wasn't, he stayed silent. The church did too. So did the school. So did this town. A heavy quiet settled in the sanctuary. Clara let the words hang. Emily was left to die alone in that shelter, and while people placed flowers and plaques, no one asked the right questions. But she never gave up. She wrote her story. She left us clues. She rang the bell in her own way. And now, it's ringing. Clara turned to the side table, where she had placed Emily's original school bell, retrieved from the basement where old supplies had been stored. Rusted, chipped, but still functional. She struck it once. A sharp, echoing chime rang out across the church. The entire room flinched. After the service, people approached her with stunned faces, some with tears, some in silence. A few avoided her completely. Sheriff Collins spoke briefly. "The investigation is ongoing," she said. "Several individuals are being questioned. Additional charges are expected." Later that evening, Clara walked back to the shelter site, now completely cordoned off. A forensic team continued to comb the area. She stood there in the quiet. And then, one by one, people began arriving. They came in silence, with candles, with notes, with photos. By sundown, a makeshift memorial had formed, dozens of people lighting candles for a girl they had once forgotten. Clara placed the diary pages beside the flowers. "She didn't run away," she said quietly to no one and everyone. "She was brave, and you let her die." A voice beside her spoke. She saved more than she knew. Clara turned. It was Robbie Taylor, a young boy whose parents had once lived near the poisoned creek. He had survived childhood cancer linked to the groundwater. "Doctors said I was lucky," Robbie said. "But maybe it wasn't just luck." Clara nodded. Maybe it was her. Emily Harper was buried on a calm Saturday morning, under a clear sky that felt too peaceful for the occasion. After 45 years of silence, the Harper family held a funeral with her name etched in stone. A real headstone, not a plaque or a story or a whisper, but something that would last. The small cemetery behind Mount Olive Baptist Church, once a place of avoidance for Clara, was now a sight of solemn reckoning. Clara stood by the casket, watching the crowd. Some she recognized, some she didn't. Older faces wrinkled by time, younger ones who had only heard the story through town legend. Some came out of guilt, others curiosity, but they all came. Sheriff Collins stood in uniform. Pastor Harold sat quietly in the back, not leading the service, just listening. He had confessed fully. George Langston had too. Their testimonies, combined with journal entries, town records, and environmental findings, had resulted in multiple arrests and investigations, some state, some federal. Names were named, charges filed. And while not everyone who had played a role was still alive, the truth was no longer buried. As the minister read Emily's favorite psalm, Clara laid a red ribbon on top of the casket, a replica of the one Emily had worn every day to school. Then she stepped forward to speak. Emily Harper was 12 years old when she disappeared. For 45 years, the world believed she had been taken, lost, or forgotten. She wasn't. She saw something wrong and tried to do what was right. And instead of being protected, she was hidden. Not just in a shelter, but in memory, in silence. This town buried more than a child. It buried guilt, truth, and responsibility. But now we're digging it up. We don't heal by pretending. We heal by remembering. We heal by listening to the voices we ignored. Emily's voice never stopped ringing. We just weren't brave enough to hear it. Later that afternoon, Clara sat alone in her car overlooking the Briar Ridge Valley. A gentle wind rustled the trees. The town felt different, lighter, as though the weight of a long-held secret had finally been lifted. Her phone buzzed with a voicemail from a local journalist asking for an interview. Another request for a podcast appearance, a publisher asking if she had considered writing a book. She didn't answer any of them. Not yet. She had decisions to make. That evening, she visited her father in the assisted living facility. He was seated in the garden, watching bees dance around a row of tulips. "She's home now," Clara said, sitting beside him. Daniel nodded slowly. "I dreamt of her last night. She was riding her bike, but this time, she made it to school." Tears welled in Clara's eyes. "She would have been a teacher," he said. "She always said that. Said she wanted to teach kids how to speak the truth." Clara reached over and held his hand. "She still is." Weeks passed. The church held a service of confession and remembrance. Donations poured in from former congregants and members of the public, funding the creation of the Emily Harper Foundation, a nonprofit focused on environmental justice and child advocacy. Clara was offered the position of executive director. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she walked the school route Emily had once taken. The same cracked sidewalks, the same trees casting morning shadows. She stood beneath the bell at the school gates. It rang at 8 a.m., and for the first time, it sounded different. Like closure, like hope. Clara stood in the sanctuary of Mount Olive Baptist Church, sunlight filtering through the stained glass, casting quiet rivers of color across the pews. It had been 3 months since the funeral. 3 months since the truth about Emily Harper had broken through the surface of Briar Ridge like light through a storm cloud. The town had changed. Not overnight, but visibly. The once wary glances Clara received had softened. Apologies had replaced whispers. Children now played near the newly built Emily Harper Memorial Garden, planted beside the school she never reached. And most remarkably, the church bell rang again, not out of routine, but out of reverence. Clara placed the final box of her aunt's recovered belongings in a glass display case in the church vestibule. The ribbon, a page from her diary, the photograph, a plaque read, "Emily Hope Harper, 1968 to 1980, truth does not die when buried. It waits to be found." Sheriff Collins approached from the doorway. "You've done a lot of good here," she said quietly. "I just told the truth," Clara replied. "That's more than most." Collins handed her a small envelope. Inside was a letter from the State Historical Preservation Office, confirmation that the shelter site would be protected as a landmark, a place where voices lost to time were finally heard. Later that day, Clara met with a board of community members organizing the Emily Harper Foundation. She accepted the role of executive director, not because it was expected, not because it was offered, but because the fight for justice and truth didn't end with her aunt's story. It began there. On a quiet Sunday evening, Clara visited the cemetery alone. She knelt beside Emily's grave and laid a single red tulip at its base. "I thought I came back to take care of Dad," she whispered. "But I think I came back for you." The breeze stirred the leaves in the trees, and for a moment, Clara thought she could hear a child laughing, not eerie, not haunting, but warm, like joy remembered. She stood, brushed the dust from her jeans, and looked toward the schoolyard in the distance. She walked the rest of the way. At the old school gate, the bell tower stood above her like a watchful eye. The rope hung still. Clara reached out, took hold of the rope, and gave it one firm pull. The bell rang, clear, resonant, full. This time, it was heard by everyone. This time, it was answered.